group. Doug, what did you think about, because as I was saying, with the interview show, it's either I like the interviewer or I like the kinds of people they talk to. This was, again, I don't think Tom Six would have found himself among this list of people on any other show if it wasn't for this gleeful love that Alec Baldwin apparently has with this guy's work. What did you think of Baldwin's interview style? What did you think of, again, his different style, really, with someone that he's this, it seemed to be this real guilty pleasure of his, and it was like, I get to enjoy this for about 45 minutes before this all ends. And then him sitting down with Questlove, someone that I picture Alec Baldwin like having coffee with Questlove on the Upper East Side.
Yeah, I mean, definitely two completely different interviews. I enjoyed the Delightful Deviant interview so much more than I did the Questlove interview.
Interesting.
And again, well, we've all said, none of us have seen the movie.
Right.
The fast-paced, kinetic stuff was a little much, even for me, enjoying Alec Baldwin in this interview. It was, I think even that was my note. It was like, wow, this is fast-paced. This is a lot to, the energy level. And then it was such a distinct drop when he interviewed Questlove. And I was like, well, okay, so this is, really such a different interview. And I think that maybe if I'd heard Questlove interview first, I might not have felt this way, but it was a letdown when I listened to the second episode.
Oh, see, because I thought that Alec Baldwin was... He was trying to prove himself as a fan. That was my big takeaway, is that from that specific Tom Six interview, is like he was trying to answer for Tom Six the entire time.
Right.
Tom Six would start a sentence or start talking about a film, and Alec Baldwin would be like, "Oh, you mean that film? Oh, the one about the thing, and I'm going to tell you that."
Sure.
And
again, he was being a goofy fan. I can tell you from the other episodes I listened to, not just Questlove that we asked everyone, including Doug, to listen to. He does not particularly do that.
No.
He's kind of relaxed. He lets people talk. But boy, with that one, again, it was like, the one time you think, oh my gosh, I've met someone for whom I'm a massive fan, or of whom I'm a massive fan, and they're willing to talk to me about everything. So it's like, what did you think when you did this? And why did you do that? And it came off that way. But I actually enjoyed it. I thought it was a fun interview to listen to.
I enjoyed the content. I just couldn't stand the fast-paced element of... If he had just asked him questions and waited for answers. I remember sitting in the car going, Alec, let him talk.
Sure.
Alec, let him talk.
Now, how did you feel during the Questlove interview? Did you feel any of that, or did it feel like totally different? Questlove had all the space he needed.
So I, unlike Doug, really enjoyed the Questlove, but I think it's because I'm a music fan and a music history fan. And because so much of the content of their conversation is about music, it really worked for me. And I was playing video games while listening to the Questlove interview. Okay. So I had something happening while I was listening to it. So I wasn't aware of how slow it was going necessarily. I paid it attention. I remember the content of their discussions and all that stuff. And I also think that Questlove is not the kind of guy who is going to rush anything.
Sure.
He is a in-the-pocket groove drummer. He is not Slayer... double kick, and so it'll never be a situation wherein he is tearing ass through anything. And I think Alec Baldwin was able to feel that and kind of slow down to meet his pace. Because in other episodes, I also listened to the Howard Schultz, who's the founder of Starbucks, and that one was much more ask a question, wait for a response. He knew a lot about information. It's clear that Alec Baldwin does a lot of research.
Right. I expect him to. I think he's an intellectual and a very bright guy.
I think he's an intellectual and a really bright guy, yeah. And I think that there's plenty of interview shows where people maybe don't do the same kind of level of interviewing.
I agree.
Research and background.
Right.
Do I need Alec Baldwin's voice? That was a question I have for you, Doug, is do you care about Alec Baldwin? Do you care about his opinion, or why do you think he would do an interview show?
Well, I think like most opinions, I don't care about, I don't care about most people's opinions.
Okay.
In general, unless when we're talking about, do I really care? Unless you're somebody who's significant in my life, I really don't care.
Okay.
I care if you're making policy decisions that affect my life.
Of course.
Sure.
I care in that way, but Alec Baldwin doesn't fall into any of those categories.
Now, do either of you feel that this podcast is a vehicle for him to express his opinions, or is he there to ask the most interesting or revealing questions, lead people to? I mean, we assume if you sit down, you're listening to an episode about, like I said, one of the ones I saw was like Joe Jackson,
right,
a musician of 4 decades now, 5 decades.
The father of Michael, Jermaine,
of course,
Tito,
of course. Not
Janet,
not
Latoya.
that Joe Jackson, the other one. I'm assuming it's because you want to know more about Joe Jackson, his multi-decade career. So the question ends up being if it's Marc Maron interviewing him or Joe Rogan, even though I don't think Joe Rogan would ever have Joe Jackson. I don't think he knows who Joe Jackson is, but I could be wrong. Or Alec Baldwin. Do you pick one or the other because you go, I like that person's interview style?
Sure.
And again, in that realm, do we feel we are getting Alec Baldwin's opinions and that's why people tune in, or because they like him as an interviewer?
Well, I mean, I can only base my answer on 2 episodes.
Sure.
Right.
And on those 2
Which
episodes,
always a difficult thing. We ask, you
I would
to do
say
that every week.
No, I don't think.
By the way, Doug, you can always listen to more than 2 if you want.
Yeah.
You have in the past.
Yeah, you have. You have a couple times.
I have.
And it may say something about how much do you like this show that you went, nah,
Well,
I didn't
gotta
go for
tell
the
you,
third.
I wonder if the second, like I said, if the second episode I listened to had been kind of that same, high-paced energy,
Right.
and I liked it as much, I might have gone for a third. But I got, when I listened to the second one, like I said, it was like when that one ended, I was like, okay, good, it's done. As opposed to when I finished the first one, because I listened to them, I think maybe even back to back.
Okay.
So when I
Right.
finished the first one, I was like, oh, cool, let's jump into the next one. And then it was a letdown for me.
Yeah,
So-
sure.
Well, let's consider something else here. Tom Six himself is a really frenetic guy. So
Also
really,
true.
he provided this, he's wildly enthusiastic about his admittedly, what I'm guessing 99% of the world's population would think are fucking insane ideas.
Yes.
And insane premises for film. And I think it's also purely his enthusiasm and belief in his ability to make his insistence that he makes these films.
Yes.
That keeps them going. In other words, the engine that drives this otherwise, I think, machine that would have never moved if it was up to anybody
Right.
else, if it was up to the normal studio process, is Tom Six. So he's exceedingly energetic guy. And again, as you say, Questlove is a drummer in a groovy, funky, organic hip-hop band and R&B band. He is going to be a much more chill guy, and it turns out that he is. So in a way, Alec Baldwin met that frenetic pace for Tom Six. It may be the guest in many ways who dictates how fast-paced the show is or how chill it is.
And the other thing is that, Questlove is a professor. And so he is
Sure.
accustomed to lecturing and
Absolutely right.
I did see that Joe Rogan actually interviewed Joe Jackson, but it's shoeless Joe Jackson.
Oh.
He brought the ghost
Right.
of famed baseball player from the 1990s that was, in Field of Dreams, a great film.
Right. And one of the other guys in the room where he records is like, hey, Shoeless Joe, what do you think about this knockout from last Saturday night at UFC 142?
Joe Jackson, what do you feel about PEDs, man? You think people should be shooting up roids?
Hey, Shoeless Joe Jackson, what do you think about vape pens? You cool with that? So yeah, that's again that kind of an artist that particularly I notice there's a lot of 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s era artists, particularly 70s era artists,
Right.
that Alec Baldwin has interviewed. So again, this is one of his niches, but that next episode may be a policymaker or someone who is observing
Right.
policymakers or national heads. So it is an interesting collection. I actually really like Alec Baldwin's voice. I do think he's a really bright, funny
Sure.
guy. So I actually enjoy hearing him interview. I don't really like hearing Marc Maron's voice. I don't
No.
like his hey man kind of, late 70s kind of keep on trucking bullshit. And I mean, it's fine for him. Obviously, he's a really
Right.
well-loved interviewer. I just realized I didn't enjoy it after a while.
But the thing is, I guess the crux of my question, and I still don't really know if I have a clear understanding, is that Marc Maron started a podcast in his garage so he could talk to his friends and possibly
Sure.
push his comedy. Oprah decided to start a podcast because she is a thinker in the same way that Joe Rogan is, and they probably wanted to learn things from the people and also
Right.
had their friends on. Why would Alec Baldwin, star of stage and screen, a person who is obviously very successful, in film and television, being an actor, want to sit down and have these conversations with people. Oprah needs it because that's what she does. She's an interviewer.
Right.
Joe Rogan, wants to learn stuff and push weird quasi alt-right shit.
Right.
And Mark Maron is bored. Why did Alec Baldwin...
And Mark Maron was kind of he was like, every other element of my career has failed. This is going to be my last cast. And of course it changed everything. And he's got Maron, his own, scripted TV show.
Right.
I honestly think it's because Baldwin is also a intellectual creature. I think he's a seeker and he's really interested in how these people's minds work. I think most intellectual people are.
And I think that's true. I mean, you and I and Doug sit around here and we talk about stuff because we like to analyze and we like to talk to Doug and ask him questions.
Thanks for including me in that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I noticed you gave yourself a little pause. Like, yeah, I'll include
Well, in many ways, you are it's profoundly unfortunate for you. You are the week after week interviewee of Brandon and I.
Well, here's the other question. Do you like to analyze things?
Yes.
Okay.
I do.
So, I know that John and I do because a lot of our conversations are analyzing the things.
Right,
sure.
But, most of our conversations haven't been, until we started this podcast, really sitting down and going through and analyzing stuff.
I would say, though, I like to analyze things, but the scope of the things I want to analyze is pretty small.
Right. Is it podcasts? Would you have ever decided that podcasts was the thing that you want to analyze?
Honestly,
right.
honestly, it would never. But in the same tone, like this guy, Tom Six, obviously I know nothing about his movies, any of that. I know enough to think that I would want to ask him a bunch of questions to see how that crazy mind works. Versus Questlove, which I like music. I'm not a huge music artist fan.
Okay.
And in that realm, I'm sure there are other artists where I'd be like, oh, that's really interesting. I'd love to find out his story. I didn't care, not in a negative way.
Okay.
But I didn't care to find out about Questlove's history.
Got it. Okay, so we're going to put you in the silence room. Don't listen. John, we need to get Doug to start going around and interviewing every torture porn director that we can find. And then expand from there.
Eli Roth will absolutely show up.
I'm just saying.
If you just ask him,
let's get
up.
Doug to start interviewing people that are really gross.
Right.
Because I think it'd be really funny.
If we said we have Cuban cigars, bottle service, frankly, a vape pen, I think Eli Roth would show up.
Hell yeah, he would. Okay, Doug, back in.
What'd you guys talk about?
So we're gonna
Oh, wouldn't you
have
like
so
to
much
know,
fun.
Doug?
We're gonna have such fun with you, Doug.
By the way, Cone of Silence was such a good investment.
It was such a good investment.
When we had the guys install it in my ceiling in my dining room, which is where we are, I thought, this is wildly extravagant.
$50,000.
Yeah, this is a lot of money.
And today,
but a big step up from just earmuffs, right?
Baby. Yes, for me running over to Doug and just clamping my hands on his head. Well, guys, that is Alec Baldwin.
But you didn't.
What else do you want to say? I mean, we definitely could have more to say about this. It was two really different
Alec
guys.
Baldwin a narcissist? Is it that where he's like, my voice needs to be heard, or I need to be asking these people these? Other people aren't filling this space that I can fill as Alec Baldwin.
Okay, so having listened to 4 or 5 episodes, which is a long shot from all of them. It's just a little dip in the toe in there. Just my take on this. I could totally be wrong. This is just what I walked away with. If someone said, hey, I'm thinking of listening to it, what did you think about it? He does not inject his own opinion in what I've done. Frankly, someone like a Mark Maron talks vastly more about himself
Certainly true.
than Alec Baldwin did.
Okay.
He seemed to really just be there to guide this person to talk about the interesting realms of their life.
Right. So maybe he just wants to be an interviewer.
I think he's genuinely interested. Look, if you'd said to Alec Baldwin a few years ago, you're going to get to interview your childhood hero, Roger Daltrey, in one of your favorite bands of all time.
Sure.
That has influenced every twist and turn of, the first 30 years of your life. And you'll get to now. You just set up the mic, sit down, say, this is my podcast. I interview people and he'll show up. I think it'd be more than enough. I think it shows that he's someone who is interested in other people.
I mean, certainly. I mean, he's been doing it since 2013. I just looked it up. I mean, there are
good. I had the number right.
Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of episodes. So it's clearly something that he wants to do.
Yeah, it's like 168
Maybe he's just bored. Doing Trump on Saturday Night Live is all he seems to be doing these days.
Maybe right now, but also I think there are a lot of actors who feel like. And this is obviously I've never interviewed him, so I don't know. But I'm saying I get that feeling.
No, speculate. I want you to make claims.
I'm going to wildly speculate and say that I think a lot of actors especially ones who have either been very successful or are currently successful,
right,
feel like they cannot stop the momentum. So if there's not an
Sure.
acting job,
Right,
there needs
right.
to be something else going on to fill that space. And I think especially, I'm going to make just an assumption about Alec Baldwin,
Right.
but